Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, and boy, do I have an inspirational show for you today. Because as we approach 600 interviews with some of the biggest names in technology, every now and again I come across someone that epitomises everything that I wanted to achieve with this daily tech podcast. Sure, it's a tech podcast, and I love how technology is not only transforming multiple industries, but I also love how it's transforming people's lives. For example, I think it was a lady called Maria way back on episode 61 who found herself being turned down for a job at Starbucks because she had blue hair. But she used that negative experience to create her own 100% organic cafe, which was completely solar powered and on wheels, and it was called Wheelie's Cafe. But she ended up selling her coffee outside the Starbucks that turned her down, outselling the global brand, and quickly expanded her franchise to over 60 countries. And that's a story that always sticks with me, and I was reminded of that story by today's guest, Andrew Rubin, who also shares an inspirational story too. He's the founding CEO of a cybersecurity unicorn called Illumio. And his story epitomised the concept of it's not what you know, but who you know. Andrew's fast and unconventional rise in Silicon Valley from a small business owner in St. Louis with very little security background only 5 years ago to fast-tracking Illumio to unicorn status in just 6 months after launching out of stealth in 2014 is truly inspiring. But I don't want to reveal too many spoilers, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to New York so we can speak with Andrew Rubin from Illumio. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Andrew. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks so much for having me, Neil. My name is Andrew Rubin, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a cybersecurity software company called Illumio, which is based in Silicon Valley, in the heart of Silicon Valley in Sunnyvale, California. And when people say, what does Illumio do at the highest level? What is the simplest explanation? Because cybersecurity is obviously a very broad category, broader now than ever before. The way that we always answer it is Illumio's software does two things for its customers. The first thing that it does is it is very much like an MRI machine in a hospital that a doctor uses to take a picture of a body to look inside and see how things are connected and how things are moving through the body. Except our MRI machine or our software does this for compute and applications that run in data centers and in cloud environments. In other words, the first thing that we do is we build and deliver a visual map that allows our customers to see and understand all of the things running in these places, how they're all connected and talking to each other, and how they depend on one another. And then from that map, the second thing that our software does is it allows you to deliver something called segmentation. Some people say microsegmentation, which is really just a way of saying that you can write policies that control how things should and should not talk to one another. And that has become a very big part of the cybersecurity industry recently, specifically because people want to manage and control risk, and making sure that things talk to each other the right way and not the wrong way is a very effective way to do that. So that's what Illumio does at a very simple or high level.
Now, when I was researching you guys, I quickly discovered that Illumio is a cybersecurity unicorn. But what really stood out for me when I was doing my research is that you've enjoyed a fast and incredibly unconventional rise in Silicon Valley that is truly inspirational. So from a small business owner in St. Louis with little security background only 5 years ago to fast-tracking Illumio to unicorn status just 6 months after launching out of stealth in 2014 is exceptional, phenomenal, and something I've not heard before. So can you share that inspirational story and maybe the secret to your success for any people on their own startup journey listening?
Sure. Well, I think there's probably the secret to anybody's success, and certainly entrepreneurial success, is start by doing what you love and spend time figuring out what that is. And for me, it's really two things. One, I love building and working with incredible teams, and I think that that's probably ultimately the key to success for every company. Our people are truly at the center of everything we do, and certainly at the center of any success that we have. And the second thing is I love spending time with customers, and that's actually the common thread through my entire journey. Is that, from, as they say, carrying a bag as a salesperson all the way through to starting and helping to build Illumio as part of the team, there is a very deep love of spending time with customers, understanding what problems they're trying to solve, and then trying to bring a solution to them that's hopefully the best possible solution to solve those problems. So I think if you take your question and unpack it into how do you figure out what you want to do, I would say find what you love. And it's sort of ironic, and maybe it shouldn't be, that when you figure out what you love doing, it's interesting that you tend to be really good at it. And so I think for me, that was a very, very important theme, was the customer thread has always been there through my entire story. I think the other piece of your question, though, which is really about Illumio and what happened to us in terms of our fundraising early on, and more importantly, the acceleration we've had in customers like Morgan Stanley and Salesforce, I think that actually comes to a really important part of the story, which is your platform is incredibly important. And what I mean by that is certainly your software platform or your technology platform, but your company platform is incredibly important. And I think one thing that Illumio and many other companies have benefited from recently is that cybersecurity has become a very visible and obviously a very important platform story for every enterprise, for every government. It has become a real topic of conversation, and it's become a real problem and challenge that companies and governments are obviously trying to solve. And so I think as a result of being in the middle of that conversation, hopefully having built something that allows us to help our customers to solve this very big, important problem and challenge, that creates a platform that allows us to have more visibility and maybe even a louder voice than we otherwise would have in the past. So I believe that both of those things really are very important.
Now, when I was doing my research, I also discovered that there are 9 other cybersecurity unicorn CEOs at companies out there, and they are at companies such as Cylance, Crowdstrike, and Tanium. But you're the only one without a tech pedigree or deep roots in security. And again, which makes your story even more fantastic. And it's certainly not held you back, but can you share your experiences? And has that been challenging, or has it actually liberated you?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I actually love the way that you ended asking the question about challenging or liberating. It's probably both. I think that in reality, what happens is that you have to have expertise. You have to spend the time and make the effort to obviously learn. And although I may not be an engineer or a software programmer by background, I certainly have spent my entire career, my working life in technology in some form, infrastructure, telecom, and of course, cybersecurity. And those things are threaded together a little more tightly than it may appear. So a lot of the learning that I did earlier in my career certainly threads through to what we do today. But to your point and to your question, I'm not a traditional sort of founder that has an engineering pedigree. I've learned through osmosis. I've learned by sitting in customer meetings and probably more than anything, sitting with my teams over time. So I think that it's a challenge in that you understand that you have to do the work in order to be credible, in order to obviously be able to contribute. I do think it's liberating as well. I'm a very big believer that having open apertures and different perspectives is incredibly important in life and certainly in business. And, you know, having grown up in New York City, having gone to school and lived in St. Louis, and of course now being in Silicon Valley, being in California, even looking at it just through the lens of 3 different parts of a country is actually a perspective. And so spending time with different customers in different industries, spending time with different teams, I think there's an enormous amount of value in having an open aperture and different perspectives. So I think it's a challenge, and it's one that's very surmountable, as you said. And I think it's liberating and value add to look at the world through multiple lenses.
I completely agree. And something I say on this show very often is, especially in the tech industry, diversity of thought is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would go further and I would say that it's probably key in any industry. But there is no doubt that in tech nowadays, I think it's incredibly important.
So Goldman Sachs also named you as one of the most interesting entrepreneurs of the year for the last 3 consecutive years. I mean, can you tell me more about that accolade?
I will tell you first that I'm honored and humbled by it, and they've been very kind to do it now 3 years in a row. What I will absolutely tell you, because I believe it very deeply, is it ties right back to that question you asked a few moments ago that we talked about the platform. I'm honored and I'm humbled that they awarded it to me. But really what I believe they're doing is they're saying that Illumio is doing something incredibly important, that is meaningful, that you're doing it for customers and helping them solve problems that are important and meaningful. And I may be the one who was the recipient of the award, but in every sense of the word, I believe that it is on behalf of the company. And I think it is as a result of the platform that we've built and the problems that we're solving. And so, I hope that we continue to do that, whether I get the award or not going forward.
Now, listening to your story, there are elements of the cliche, it's not what you know, but who you know. But the key to your success seems to be mentorship. And you built Illumio 100% through your mentors, enlisting people such as Mark Benioff, Ben Horowitz and John Thompson. But what did these tech titans see in an unknown sales guy from New York City? I mean, you must have had that shining spark to get them on board.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. The mentorship aspect of my story, and obviously I believe Illumio's story, has ended up being a lot more important, and I will say more visible than I imagined it would be. It's become something that I think people are curious about, how the company and I have built this collection of people that have been so kind and generous with their time to me, and obviously, to the benefit of the company. And so I talk about it openly because I actually think that it's an incredibly important part of our story and my story. It goes back to this: how do you take the challenge of not necessarily having domain expertise, but also you could just say experience. One of the things that I'm proud of and amazed by is that if you think about it, for a real first-time venture-backed CEO to build a company in any industry, really, every day that you go to work, effectively, it's the biggest job that you've ever had, because if the company's growing, then you're effectively facing a bigger organization and presumably different experiences, challenges, and opportunities than you've seen before. And so I think one of the ways that I've really worked hard to try and make myself the best CEO possible, make myself the best team member possible, is surround myself with a group of people who have seen all of this before and who are willing to share some of the experiences they've had, obviously help to point out some of the potholes that people tend to get stuck in or step in, and hopefully give me great advice about things to go do to take advantage of opportunities that I might not see quite as easily or as early as they have in the past. And so the mentorship piece for me has been unbelievably important personally. Many of these people have become very close friends in the process, but I actually think that it's one of the ways that you sort of use that old expression about surround yourself with really smart people. I think that's just an extension of that. What I would tell you is that I really believe that if you look at how you use those mentors in terms of helping to build the company story, I think it comes back to passion and love of what you do. I think one of the reasons why a number of these people have been willing to really so generously give time to me is because of the platform that we're building and the importance of what we're doing for our customers. But also, as you said, there's a spark. And I think the spark is simply, I love what I do. And when you're that passionate about something, I do believe that it becomes contagious. And I think that's true really across the board. When you see somebody who loves what they do and you see them doing it, it's a contagious feeling. And you get excited about it. You get excited for them. And I think that, that's probably something that does come through. I obviously love Illumio and the team that I get to work with every day, but I also love what we do. And I think what we're doing for our customers is insanely important. And so it's hard not to be passionate about.
I completely agree with you. And so much of what you say there resonates with me, because one of the reasons I love recording this podcast, for example, is that our conversation here on a Friday afternoon will be beamed around the world on a variety of platforms and devices. But there could be somebody listening tomorrow, or equally in 2 years' time from now, and embarking on their own startup journey, just simply looking for a little bit of inspiration. So if there is somebody listening tomorrow or 2 years' time from now, what advice would you pass on from your unconventional path of building a unicorn company, and how other non-traditional, non-pedigree entrepreneurs can rewire their own approaches to mentorship by following in your footsteps? So
you're probably going to guess that the first answer is going to be figure out what you love, because obviously we spent quite a bit of time talking about that. I'm going to add something, though, that I think is a little more specific about where you start the journey. I've always been a very big believer, and I think Illumio is, in every sense, it really been this incredible manifestation of something that, PJ Kerner, my co-founder and our CTO, and I sort of were hoping at the beginning, but until you actually start building, you don't obviously know exactly where the journey will take you. But I've always been a big believer that incredible companies that are sustainable, durable, and of course over time become valuable, it's because they figure out a problem or a challenge that a customer is having, and hopefully it's many, many customers around the world, and they are insanely good at solving that problem for their customers. You have to be doing it in a big market. And the reason why is because if you don't have a large market, if you don't have a global market nowadays, it's very hard to build something that becomes big and meaningful. And so I really believe deeply that one of the opportunities that Illumio presented PJ and I at the beginning, and now our team, of course, as we're building the company together, is we found a problem that's big, that's challenging, and that's incredibly meaningful, and not to one industry or one set of customers or a set of customers in one country, but it's a global problem. And so that allows us the opportunity to build a big, meaningful, sustainable, durable, and valuable company. Now, of course, the question of whether or not you get there becomes execution, and that's all about the team you build, figuring out the right answer for your customers, building the right answer for your customer problem. But it starts by identifying something that's real and that's big and meaningful. And I really believe that as an entrepreneur, those two things, figure out what you love and figure out something that's going to be a meaningful problem to solve, and then be insanely good at solving it for your customers. And it sounds simple when you say it that way. And of course, it's so hard to actually thread all that together. But I do think that those ingredients are really the core ingredients of building a meaningful, sustainable, durable company.
And you really are living proof of that as well. You really have exceeded. It's just amazing what you've achieved there. But I'm conscious I don't want to spend too long on your own story because we need to talk about Illumio itself. So can you tell the listeners a little about why that platform is so unique and what problems it solves for their customers, so just so they can visualize what you guys do?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you used the word visualize, because I'm going to try and paint a picture in very simple terms, actually. But I think it's a powerful picture that describes this thing called segmentation that we talked about briefly at the beginning of the call. If you ask people, anybody, to imagine a picture of a submarine, or you hand them a pencil and a piece of paper, or maybe you hand them a crayon and a piece of paper and say, draw a submarine. Everybody sort of draws the same picture. You draw the hull, which is sort of the elongated oval, and then you draw the little pop-up that sits on top where the periscope is. But the reality is that if you were to draw the schematic of a submarine, you'd actually add a third element, which is you would draw lines that form compartments inside of the hull. Because the truth is that when you look at a submarine, or you look at the blueprints of a submarine, it's not actually one open space. It's actually lots of individual compartments. And if you think about why it's designed that way, it's interesting that it's actually very simple. There's probably a lot of benefits to doing that, but there's one that supersedes them all, which is if the hull springs a leak, instead of the ship flooding and everybody inside being at risk, what you do by building compartments is you say, if the hull springs a leak, I just close that one compartment and the rest of the ship stays dry, which allows the ship to surface and they can fix the hull and then the ship is fine, as opposed to the entire space flooding and the ship sinks. And those compartments are really about risk mitigation. Everybody knows that under normal circumstances, the hull should not spring a leak. And the truth is that 90, maybe 95, maybe even 99% of the time, it doesn't. But because we're talking about people's lives, if it does, we're going to spend the extra effort to put those compartments in to make sure that even if it's 0.0001% of the time that it springs a leak, that in that unlikely event, there's a way to make sure that everybody's all right. So why is that important for segmentation? Because what I just described in the submarine, that picture that you now have in your head, that's effectively what Illumio allows our customers to do inside of their data center and cloud environments. Instead of having these very large environments where lots of things are talking to each other, whether they should or they shouldn't, which of course introduces the risk that if one thing gets sick, it potentially can infect many, many other things. What our software does is it not only draws the picture so that you can see the environment and understand how all these things are connected, but it actually allows you to write policy to build those compartments. We call it segmentation, but it's the same end goal, which is to effectively control how things talk to each other, to build compartments or ring fences around very valuable assets in the environment, and ensure that if something does get sick, the hull springs a leak, that it doesn't necessarily infect everything. And if you think about it 10 years ago, maybe even arguably 7 or 8 years ago, you would work off of the assumption that security was really about keeping all bad things out all the time. Obviously, I don't need to go through the list of breaches that we've all read about and seen on TV in the last 5, 6, 7 years. We all know that no matter how hard a company tries, the probability of being safe 100% of the time is probably zero. And therefore, although we try and keep bad things out, we always have, and we will going forward, we should. We need a strategy that says that when we miss, this is how we're going to make sure that it's not catastrophic. And segmentation represents the way to do that. Just like building the compartments in the submarine is not about preventing the leak. It's about having a risk mitigation strategy if there is a leak. And that's really what Illumio does. And as you can imagine, given the breaches that we've all seen, there's a very real desire now to make sure that we do everything we can to mitigate the risk of a breach and then mitigate the effects of a breach if it takes place.
I love the metaphor you use there as the submarine and stopping the leaks, because as a security company in a mobile-first digital age, with the rise of smart homes and always connected IoT devices, and that long list of IoT devices just keeps coming, I mean, what are the biggest security threats facing users and businesses, and how do you think they could protect themselves? Is it all around this segmentation?
Well, I think that it's fair to say that no security vendor or anybody in the industry should ever say it's all about any one thing. I think we're an incredibly important piece of the puzzle, but it is a puzzle and there are lots of different pieces. Another way to say it is there's lots of different strategies and then tools you use in order to build a cybersecurity posture. What I will agree with entirely is sort of the direction of your question around the attack surface has grown exponentially, maybe even parabolically at this point. Every one of these devices, everything that we're now using to establish connectivity is yet another thing that could be compromised or yet another way into the data centers where most of the most sensitive data and most valuable applications ultimately reside. And I think one of the things that companies are recognizing is that because of that explosion of connectivity that you just described, the reality is that your security mission used to be keep all bad things out. And when I say out, I mean in particular of the data center and the cloud compute environments where your apps live and your customer data or your company data is. And I think what's happened is that mission is now bifurcated into these two missions. Still a very valid mission to obviously have a strategy, spend time, effort, and money to buy tools to help keep bad things out. But given that we know that's not going to work 100% of the time, mission number 2 has now been mitigate the risk of something going wrong becoming catastrophic. And that's usually when we end up reading about it on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or seeing it on CNBC, is when all of the sudden these things go from a simple and small breach to something catastrophic. And so risk mitigation or segmentation, we believe, is a key element of that second mission.
So you've been on an incredibly inspirational journey, but I've got to ask, what happens next? I mean, where do you see your journey taking you in the next 5 years? Are you going to win that award? 5 years on the trot?
I truly don't know. You'd have to ask, obviously, the incredibly generous people at Goldman Sachs who have given it to me and the company now for a few years running. What I will tell you is this. I certainly know what I hope is next and what we work very, very hard. And I say we because obviously there's a team of a little over 300 of us now showing up every day trying to do what I'm about to describe, which is we want to build a sustainable, durable, and valuable company. And I say sustainable and durable first because I think if you get sustainable and durable right, valuable becomes a byproduct of that. And the way you build a sustainable and durable company is you find a big, important problem and challenge for your customers, and you're insanely good at solving it for them. And I really, truly believe that if you figure that part out, the rest of it all falls into place. And so we are very heads down, working very, very hard to do exactly that.
Well, a huge thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to come and speak with me today. But before I do let you go, could I just ask that you remind the listeners of where they can find you online and also maybe contact a member of your team if they have any questions about Illumio?
Absolutely. So first, I want to thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if anybody is interested in finding us at Illumio, Our website is www.illumio.com, and it is ILLUMIO. So www.illumio.com. And I also am very open about my finding me. And so if you want to send me an email, please feel free. It's andrew@illumio.com. And again, thank you so much for having me, Neil. It was really a pleasure.
There's so much I love about today's episode. I'm sure there's so much value that listeners have got from it, from just simply finding what you love. I think that's so important and something that is so difficult for a lot of people. And many people, I would include myself in this, didn't find it till slightly later on in life. But once you've found it and surround it yourself with smart people and work hard, you're living proof of what you can achieve. But one of the things I love more than anything is, despite all that success and everything that you've achieved, you're still a humble guy, and I think that goes such a long way. So a big thank you for coming on today.
Thank you again.
Of the 9 cybersecurity unicorn CEOs at companies like Cylance, Crowdstrike and Tanium, Andrew is the only one without a tech pedigree or deep roots in security. But he's not let that hold him back, and I love how Goldman Sachs has named him one of their most interesting entrepreneurs of the year for the past 3 consecutive years. So it's clear to me that Andrew has got a real spark. And I love how he's built Illumio 100% through his mentors, enlisting big names such as Mark Benioff, Ben Horowitz and John Thompson. So I cannot thank Andrew enough for taking the time to share his unconventional path to building a $1 billion plus company, and how other non-traditional, non-pedigree entrepreneurs can listen to this and maybe rewire their own approaches to mentorship. And that encapsulates everything that this show stands for. Because all too often we hear people create excuses for why they cannot do things and they cannot alter their path. But I want you to use Andrew's story to inspire you. So if you're listening to this episode in August 2018 or December 2022, it doesn't matter. I want you to email me with how Andrew's story has inspired you. Or equally, share your similar story with me too. And you can do that by emailing me at techblogwriter@outlook.com, or of course you can tweet me at Neil C. Hughes. So just before I go, I just wanted to say that one of the biggest things I loved about Andrew's story today was, like I said in the show, despite being at the top of his game, winning awards and heading up a cybersecurity unicorn, he still works tirelessly to achieve his goals and remains remarkably polite and humble with it. So for that alone, Andrew, I salute you. Finally, a huge thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in and listening to this Daily Tech podcast. And remember, work hard, stay humble, my friends, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.